I'm Don, and my wife is Carla. We've been married for 8.5 years and have 2 kids, an 8-year-old named Steve and a 4-year-old named Lori. Carla was pregnant when we tied the knot, and Steve was born 6 months after our wedding. Most of our friends and family didn't make a big deal about us getting married, except for Carla's parents. They were, naturally, disappointed in their daughter, but they made sure to point the finger at me. I was the one who got her pregnant, and I'm the guy who supposedly ruined all her opportunities. I never matched up to the man they envisioned for their daughter, and I never will. They believed she had to settle for me, and that really got to me. Admittedly, I did do what they accused me of. I convinced her, and I was her first. That part is true. But as far as I'm concerned, her parents can keep their blame to themselves. I love their daughter more than they could ever hope for from any man, and she knows it. But her mother and father will never see it. They can't move past her getting pregnant. Nothing I've done or ever will do will change their minds. I'll always be the bad guy in their eyes until they pass away. Carla and I met when she was a high school senior in Chicago Heights, while I was in my second year of college at the University of Illinois in Champaign. The moment I met her, I knew she was the one for me. We quickly became a couple and just felt like a perfect match. I took her purity about 1 month after we started going together, and we would make love almost every time we got together after that. After Carla finished high school, she moved back in with her parents and took a job as a teller at a Chase Manhattan bank. I saw her nearly every weekend, whether it was in Chicago Heights or Oak Lawn, where my folks lived. With 1 year left in college, I learned she was 2 months pregnant. We quickly organized a wedding and got married in November, and, as I mentioned, Steve came along 6 months later in May. I completed my degree just 2 weeks after Steve's birth and landed a job in airport security at O'Hare Airport. Carla stayed with her parents until I graduated and secured my job. We had everything set up in our deplaned apartment and moved in right after my graduation. Finally, we were together as a family, and for the next 8 years, life was blissful. Better jobs, a new house, Steve growing up quickly, a satisfying marriage, the arrival of Lori, and both kids thriving. We were content. Promotions, more income, and increasing happiness followed. But let's move on to why I'm writing this story. All that happiness was about to change. I went through several unhappy months in my life. My wife and I were having a bit of a tiff about who was preventing the other from getting enough sleep. I'd tell her she snored and woke me up, and she'd say the same about me. She refused to believe she snored at all. But she had this annoying squeaky little snore that never failed to wake me. Once I was awake, I'd have to endure that squeaking for an hour before she'd stop, and I could fall back asleep. I know I probably snore too, as I catch myself doing it now and then. She might lose sleep as well, but it felt like she was solely blaming me, which didn't sit well. I already took enough of that from her parents, so I didn't feel I should have to take it from her too. To address the problem, I brought home a voice-activated recorder from work and set it up on the nightstand beside our bed. In a lighthearted tone, I told Carla that we'd discover who snores and who doesn't. The following morning, we both awoke simultaneously. After a sweet morning kiss, we rewound the tape and listened. Indeed, my snoring resembled a chainsaw, and she teasingly pointed out, "See what I have to endure?" It didn't take long before we distinctly heard her snoring too, sounding like squeak, 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 occurring in the pauses between my chainsaw-like snores. Carla gasped and shot me a surprised look that led to a hearty laugh. She exclaimed, "Oh my goodness, I'm terrible." We burst into laughter and she said, "Honey, we both need to work on this so we don't banish each other from the bedroom." I concurred, saying, "Yes, you definitely need to work on that squeak." I was just relieved not to be the sole bad guy. She playfully smacked my arm and apologized. "Honey, I'm sorry I placed all the blame on you. I can now see that we're equally at fault." I pulled her close for a warm and affectionate kiss and hug, followed by some intimate moments. By the time we finished, both kids were awake, and we ended up running late for work. As you can guess, what happened next is a classic case of the recorder being forgotten. A couple of days passed, and she requested that I come home early to look after the kids because she had a meeting at the bank. I spotted the recorder and couldn't resist the temptation of playing it. I wanted to hear the evidence of her snoring, but instead, I stumbled upon something entirely unexpected. The tape contained the sounds of us making love. What came next was a devastating revelation. She had been unfaithful in our marital bed. She had brought another man into our sacred space. Not much more needs to be said. As soon as I discovered the tape's contents, I reached out to our neighbor, Judy, and asked if she could watch the kids for a while because I had a major work project that required my full attention. Judy had no prior commitments, so she gladly agreed. I escorted the kids over to her place, instructed them to behave for Judy, and assured them I'd be back when dinner was ready. They were quite content to spend time with Judy and play with her kids, who were nearly the same age. After returning to the bedroom, I resumed playing the recording. "Oh my goodness, Steve, it's been too long since you've been close with me. I've really missed that over the past few months. Don't worry, my dear. I'll be intimate with you this afternoon. I genuinely wish you to become pregnant today. Don and I want another child. I would love for all 3 of my kids to share the same father. Hasn't Don ever felt suspicious about us? Doesn't he ever wonder why the kids don't resemble him at all? Is he stupid or something?" "Don't speak that way about Don. He's not stupid. I've never given him a reason to doubt my faithfulness." He chuckled. "Well, I still don't understand how you could slip the kids past him. Luckily, Stevie Jr. and Lori both resemble me, so there's no reason for him to be suspicious." "Well, perhaps today I'll give you a child that resembles me and exposes your secret. Then he'll divorce you, and you can marry me." "Stop talking about all this, Steve. I care deeply for Don and don't want to see him hurt. What you and I share is merely passionate fun, and that's all it will ever be between us." The rest of the recording was as expected, filled with the sounds of passion between a man and a woman. I won't go into detail. It's too painful for me to even think about anymore. I listened to the entire recording. My entire marriage was a facade. The love, trust, and closeness I believed we had didn't exist. There was no love or faithfulness on her part. How could she truly love me and engage in those actions? She couldn't. When I heard everything on that tape, it felt like a crushing blow. I was deeply wounded, physically unwell, my heart raced, and I prayed it wouldn't give up on me. I was repulsed, emasculated, terrified, and furious. I can't continue. There are too many words to describe what I felt. Devastated sums it up best. I wasn't a foolish man, so I knew I needed to figure out my next steps. What would happen to me, my family, my life? First, I realized I had to secure a copy of the tape for evidence. I was certain it would be necessary in some way. The recorder had a dual tape system, so I set it up to duplicate from tape 1 to tape 2 and made my copy. I placed that copy in a plain envelope and stored it in the trunk of my car. Regardless of what unfolded in the following moments, I had that tape as proof. Secondly, I understood I had to keep my knowledge a secret, at least until I had a plan in place. I rewound the tape to the end of our snoring segment and erased the rest. Then I returned the recorder to the nightstand and left the bedroom. If Carla considered it, she might wonder if the tape had recorded her and Steve. However, she wouldn't hear anything, and I wouldn't tip her off that I knew her dark secret. I knew I needed all the facts to decide what to do. To start, I thought about when Carla and I first met and went from there. I got to know her through a friend of hers from school who was dating my cousin. I figured that her high school yearbooks would be a great source of information. So I went down to the basement, rummaged around until I found the box with all our high school yearbooks, and put both of our yearbooks into my car's trunk. I made sure to put the boxes back exactly as they were to avoid raising any suspicion. If she somehow noticed they were gone, I could always claim they got mixed up in another box. Lastly, I knew that if I saw Carla that night, she'd sense that something was seriously wrong. So I reached out to my boss, Jim, for help. Jim and I had become good friends over the years I worked with him, and I knew I could confide in him. I shared what I'd discovered and asked him to cover for me for a few days so I could get to the bottom of it all and make my final decision. I requested that he arrange a trip for me to New York, under the pretense of attending an anti-terrorism school. It was consistent with courses I'd taken before and wouldn't raise any suspicions. Of course, I had no intention of actually going. I had places to visit, people to meet, and a web of lies to unravel. Jim agreed to help with the cover story, explaining that this class had come up last minute and was something I absolutely had to do. I needed to be on a plane within an hour. I called Carla on her cell phone and explained the urgent trip Jim had asked me to take. I mentioned that I'd drop the kids off at Judy's for her to watch, pack quickly, and head to the airport. I told her I didn't have all the details for the class yet, but would update her when I found out. Naturally, she wasn't thrilled about my sudden departure, but I insisted there was nothing I could do about it and said goodbye. I heard her say, "I love you, Dawn," as I hung up, but I couldn't bring myself to say it back. I went over to Judy's place and told her I had to make a sudden out-of-town trip. I explained that Carla would come by in about an hour to pick up the kids, and Judy was fine with that. I asked if I could bring Steve and Lori home with me while I packed and said my goodbyes. She agreed, so we headed back to my place. Before leaving, I needed to collect DNA samples from the kids. I managed to get saliva samples from both Steve and Lori using Q-tip swabs. I planned to have their DNA analyzed and compared to my samples to prove I wasn't their biological father. The results would confirm what I already knew from Carla's confession on the tape. After packing enough clothes for a few days, I left the house with the kids and took them to Judy's. I thanked her for watching them at such short notice and headed out. I drove to a hotel in Harvey, another suburb on Chicago's south side. It was far enough from Chicago Heights to avoid running into Carla's family, but close enough to use as a base for my investigation. After checking in, I picked up some beer and got drunk. Seemed like the only way to cope. Why lie awake in pain and hurt? Why relive it all in my mind all night? Getting drunk was my escape. The next morning, I felt terrible. It was past 11 a.m., and I thought I might not make it to noon. My head pounded, and my stomach churned, so I did the only logical thing. Had a couple more beers. Oddly, it turned out to be the right call because the next time I woke up it was 3 p.m. and I felt a bit better. I ordered coffee and toast from room service. While waiting, I showered and dressed in clean clothes. The coffee hit the spot, and I managed to keep the toast down. Now what was I going to do with the rest of the day? I checked my cell phone for messages and found 3 of them. The first was from Carla, and she was upset that I hadn't called her when I arrived in New York. She couldn't reach me because she didn't know where I was staying. She wanted me to call her as soon as I got her message. The second call was also from Carla earlier in the morning, and she was really mad at me now. I hadn't called her last night or this morning, and she was clearly irritated. I didn't care, though. I planned to give her a big excuse when I finally talked to her. I knew I had to talk to her soon, but I would delay it a bit more. After all, she was already angry, so how much angrier could she get? I actually laughed at the absurdity of it. The third call was from Jim and came just a few minutes after Carla had called. He told me she demanded to know my whereabouts and what was going on. He mentioned that I owed him big time for dealing with her, and I agreed. He explained to her that he had no more information than she did about where I was, since he didn't know the hotel. He also told her about the seminar being held at a conference center at JFK Airport, suggesting she could try to reach me there. But we both knew the bureaucracy of airport security, and even if I was there, it would be nearly impossible for her to locate me. In reality, since I wasn't there, it was even more impossible, so I felt safe until I called her. I figured I had a couple of hours to work on my project before she got home from work. I sat down with my laptop and started working through my checklist. I listed everything I already knew and noted the details I needed to fill in. I went through her yearbook and made a list of every person who had written in her junior or senior yearbooks, cross-referencing them by class year. I also called her high school and inquired about a reunion book for her upcoming 5-year reunion. The administrative assistant was quite helpful and offered me a copy of the 10-year reunion book as well, which was coming up soon. I asked if it was available electronically and provided my email address for her to send it to me. 5 minutes later, I had the list and began matching the names from the yearbook with their married names, spouses, addresses, and phone numbers. Let me tell you, it was a goldmine of information. I had the most up-to-date list I could have hoped for. I even knew details like the names of children, pets, hobbies, favorite foods, and so on for all of Carla's classmates. I also discovered that Carla had submitted our current information, including our 2 kids, with a footnote that read, "Hopefully number 3 will be on the way soon." At this point, I was pretty sure Carla would be back from work, so I decided to make the dreaded phone call to her and endure her anger for a few minutes. It had been creeping into my writing lately, didn't it? Well, that's because I no longer cared about her feelings. I blamed her for how I felt. So I wasn't going to worry if my sarcasm showed through a bit. She'd just have to deal with it. So I gave her a call. "Dawn, where the hell have you been? Why didn't you return my call last night or this morning? What the hell is going on anyway?" She was on a rant, but it didn't surprise me. I knew she would let it all out, so I let her, I explained that when I arrived it was very late, and I didn't want to call and risk waking up the kids. I admitted I had felt sorry for myself and ended up getting quite drunk. By the time I woke up, it was too late to call this morning. I also mentioned that I had been rushing to set everything up for the next few days. I told her I stayed at the Hilton Gardens Hotel at JFK Airport last night, but could only get a room for one night. I had to find a new hotel for the next couple of nights. I advised her to keep calling my cell phone, as it was the best way to reach me, but I wouldn't have it on during my classes. My plan was to create the most significant window to miss her. I knew I needed to make anonymous phone calls while I was in town, so I decided to buy one of those disposable cell phones for the purposes I had in mind. I headed to the nearby pharmacy and picked up a track phone, which was quite reasonably priced and wouldn't be traceable. It was the perfect. By the time I hung up the phone, it was nearly 6 p.m., and surprisingly, I was feeling quite good and getting hungry. I had spotted George's Rib House on my way back to the hotel and decided to stop and grab a bite to eat. Once I got back to the hotel, it was time to gather some facts. I started by going through Carla's senior yearbook, page by page, person by person. I compiled a list of everyone who had written comments in her yearbook and typed in the comments they had made. I set up a code system to categorize the types of comments. First, I used M or FM for each person. Friend was the code for those who seemed to be friends. If the person was a girl from what appeared to be Carla's close circle, I used girlfriend. For those who might have been dated or had more intimate comments, I used boyfriend. Negative comments got labeled as non-friend. Once I finished, I had a list of about 40 names, including roughly 30 females and 10 males. I organized the list first by gender code and then by other codes. In the male category, I found 5 boyfriends, 4 friends, and 1 non-friend. Among the boyfriends was Steve Wilson, who I suspected was my prime suspect, but I needed to be sure before concluding anything. I was determined to find out. The non-friend, a guy named Gil Roberts, seemed like a promising source of information, hopefully due to some unpleasant history with Carla, or perhaps a dislike for Steve. In the female category, I had 3 girlfriends, around 25 friends, and 2 non-friends. All 3 of the girlfriends had been bridesmaids at our wedding, so I knew I had to be cautious around them. I figured a couple of the friends might have some useful information, and, again, I planned to focus on the non-friends. People tend to spill more information when they didn't particularly like someone, and I was counting on that. I took my list and cross-referenced it with the reunion booklet, including married names if available, addresses, phone numbers, spouse names, children's names, hobbies, interests, and so on. I even added occupations and places of employment when I could find them. Not everyone provided the same information, but there was a wealth of data to work with. I figured the more details I had, the better my chances of getting the full story on Carla and her lover. By the time I finished compiling this information, it was a little past 10 p.m., and I'd had enough for one day. I planned to start early the next morning, hoping to wrap up my investigation by day's end. So I decided to call it a night and get some good rest. As I was turning down the bed covers, my cell phone rang. Glancing at the clock, I saw it was only 10:30 p.m., and I knew the kids were already asleep, and Carla had probably finished watching the evening news and was about to go to bed herself. I picked up the phone, wondering what she wanted to talk about. "Hi, Dawn. I thought maybe you'd call me tonight after getting settled," she said. "Well, I did consider it, but the last time I called you, I got quite an earful. So I thought I'd wait and see if you wanted to talk to me," I responded. "I'm sorry I got snippy with you earlier," she apologized. "I was just upset because I couldn't reach you. This whole trip of yours seems a bit strange, and I guess I was feeling a bit insecure. Will you forgive me?" "That doesn't exactly sound like forgiveness, honey," she shot back. "Well, maybe I'm a little ticked off myself considering how you've treated me," I replied. She fell silent for a while. I didn't know if she suspected I knew something or not, and to be honest, I didn't really care. I also wasn't sure if she was reflecting on the things that had damaged our marriage, but I kind of hoped she was. After a moment, she said, "Well, I guess I'll let you go then. Dawn, I'm sorry. I love you." I responded, "I'm sorry too. Good night, Carla." I managed to get some sleep that night, although it was somewhat restless. At least I didn't have to listen to her snoring. However, it saddened me to think about it. She was so adorable when she first realized her snoring was awful. We had laughed so hard about it and then enjoyed a fantastic morning together. Recalling what happened afterward and what might never happen again broke my heart once more, and I drifted off to sleep by default. Update. The next morning, I got an early start with my lists. I used my track phone to call several female friends, introducing myself as Roger Moore from Homeland Security. I explained that I was conducting a background check on Don Phillips, who might be joining the Chicago Area Anti-Terrorism Task Force. I mentioned that Mr. Phillips was married to the former Carla Pedersen and asked if they knew her from high school. During these calls, I inquired about Carla's high school associations. Eventually, I confirmed that Steve Wilson had indeed been her high school boyfriend. They had dated for about 3 years, and she ended the relationship a couple of months after graduating from high school. I also learned that Steve was still living in Chicago Heights, working at Chase Manhattan Bank in Chicago Heights, now as a loan officer, and he had recently gone through a divorce. It turned out he had 2 children, both boys. In the reunion booklet, I found his entry. He was a very good-looking man, and I could understand why he would catch a woman's eye. I wished I looked as handsome as him. However, despite their previous relationship, Carla chose me and gave me her virginity. But she continued to be involved with him, maintaining a relationship for years and apparently allowing him to father our children. The whys of her actions remained a mystery. Questions I couldn't answer. Maybe she could provide some answers, but I wasn't sure. So Carla ended her relationship with Steve shortly after we met, but they still worked together at the bank up until we moved to Des Plaines. That meant they were in close proximity all those days. I could understand how they rekindled their connection, but the reasons behind her choices were still unclear. I believed I had gathered enough information from the friends, so I decided to approach one of the female non-friends, Jill Johnson Marker. I maintained my cover as Roger Moore from Homeland Security and inquired about anything in Carla Pedersen's background as Don Phillips's wife that might be of significance to his consideration for a national security position. Man, as soon as I said those words, she laid into me with both barrels. She made it clear that Carla was the most unpleasant person to ever graduate from Chicago Heights High School. According to her, Carla was a boyfriend stealer and a cheater. I asked her to explain why she felt that way. She shared that in her sophomore year she was dating Steve Wilson, and Carla had taken him away from her. While she acknowledged that boyfriend stealing isn't illegal, she believed it spoke to Carla's character. As time passed and Carla met her husband Don, the flaws in her character became more apparent, she confided. According to rumors, often started by Steve, Carla resumed her relationship with Steve after they both worked at the bank. Steve proudly claimed that he had fathered 2 of her children and even spread the news that she was pregnant again this week. This was the latest gossip. Jill expressed her doubts about entrusting national security to Don Phillips due to his unfaithful wife. I hadn't expected it to be so straightforward. I also didn't anticipate how much it would pain me to realize that others were aware of what had been happening all these years while I remained oblivious. I thought I might as well get the lowdown from the other 2 non-friends, so I called the other female, and her story closely paralleled Jill's. She was the sister of Steve's ex-wife. Her sister had divorced Steve after hearing the rumors and confronting him. Steve bragged about it, mentioning he had fathered 2 more children. I requested Jill to provide me with her sister's phone number, and she willingly did. I planned to use it later. As for the male non-friend, he had been in love with Carla throughout high school, but she never gave him a chance. He mentioned that she claimed to be in love with Steve, but probably wouldn't marry him because he was so self-absorbed. Supposedly, Steve had been trying to get close with Carla for 3 years. She always told him that she would only give her virginity to her future husband, but after losing her virginity, she might consider being with Steve for old time's sake. This attitude hurt the person sharing this information with me. He had hoped to be her future husband and realized that she might not remain faithful to him. He believed she might allow Steve back into her life if he pursued it. He stopped trying to date Carla after that. Her apparent attitude stung me even more than I already was. It became clear to me that Carla hadn't planned on being faithful to me in any way. I had gathered nearly everything I needed from my list of names. Now, I wanted a bit more insight into Steve, so I visited the bank to see him in person. I wasn't going to reveal my identity, but I wanted to observe him in the flesh. He matched the pictures, tall and athletic. It was a shame that he had a negative reputation. Otherwise, he might have been a good catch. I had a few more calls to make and stops to complete before returning home, but I was confident I'd be back in Des Plaines before nightfall. I checked in at the Candlewood Suites extended stay hotel near the airport and called Carla around 8:30 p.m. I informed her that I'd be home around noon the following day and suggested she take the afternoon off for some quality time together. I had grown quite resilient in my circumstances, and I didn't let on about what I had uncovered. I figured she had lied to me for years, so a few lies from my side wouldn't hurt much. I reassured her of my love, that everything would work out fine, and then I slept well. The next morning, I stopped by my office to have a lengthy discussion with Jim. He was eager to learn what I had discovered, and I shared all the information I had gathered. He gave me an overnight envelope from the DNA lab where I had taken the DNA samples the previous day. It was an additional cost, but I was relieved that they offered overnight service. I opened the envelope because I wanted Jim to be aware of the results too. It was important to me that he knew all the facts. He was both my friend and boss, and I might need to request a significant favor from him in the future. Dear Mr. Phillips, we've completed testing on all 5 samples you provided on Wednesday, November 15th. Sample 1 is a male and is a full sibling to sample 2, also a male. Sample 3 is a male and is a full sibling to sample 4, who is a female. Samples 1 and 2 share the same father and have a different mother than samples 3 and 4. In other words, all 4 samples share a common father, but samples 1 and 2 have a different mother than samples 3 and 4. As for sample 5, which we know is you, Mr. Phillips, it is in no way related to any of the other samples. So, there is no DNA evidence to indicate that you are the biological father of any of the 4 children represented as samples 1, 2, 3, or 4. If you need further assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us. Sincerely, David Rafferty, Ph.D., Accurate DNA Labs, Inc. I had reached out to Steve's ex-wife and arranged to talk to her. She agreed to meet with me and allowed me to take saliva swabs from her 2 children. I had a sworn statement in my briefcase from her, confirming that she willingly provided the DNA samples for her 2 children. Jim gave me a warm hug before I left and expressed his sympathy for what I had discovered and what I was going through. He assured me of his support and willingness to assist in any way. He also made a lighthearted comment that he'd better watch out or I might take his job away, considering the thoroughness of my investigation in such a short time. We both shared a laugh, although it was a rare moment of joy in what had become a heavy situation. I gathered the tape, statements from many of Carla's former classmates, a letter from Steve's ex-wife, a certified letter from the DNA lab, and my aching heart. With these in hand, I went home to confront my wife. I arrived at our house a few minutes before noon. I fetched a beer from the fridge and settled in the family room, waiting for Carla to return. Shortly after 12 p.m., I heard her come in from the garage. She hurried over to me, hoping for a hug and kiss, but I evaded her. I could see a strange expression on her face when I did that, but I knew things were about to get much worse, so it didn't really matter all that much. She asked me what was going on, and I asked, "Do you want a beer?" She responded, "No, just tell me what's wrong." I said, "Carla, I know you've been having an affair." She started to speak to deny it, but I raised my hand to stop her. I told her, "I don't want to hear a word from you right now. I know you've been having an affair and I have evidence. With that knowledge, there's no reason for me to believe anything you say. So don't continue to lie to me and claim you haven't been. Just sit on the sofa and let me explain how things are going to be. That's all I want you to do right now. Don't talk, don't cry, don't deny, and don't apologize. Right at this moment, none of that matters. Just sit and listen to me." Her face turned pale, and I could see fear in her eyes. I asked her again if she wanted a beer or at least some water, and she chose a glass of water. I got it for her and pulled up a chair across from her so I could sit and look her in the eye while I shared my thoughts. "Carla, I know you're having an affair. I want you to know that I have plenty of evidence to back it up. I want to make it clear that I'm not lying to you. To be fair to you, I want your actions moving forward to show that I'm fully aware of everything. It's in your best interest to believe this. If you doubt me, you're likely to make mistakes, and you won't like the consequences. Here's what's going to happen. Today, I'm leaving this house. I'll be packing up everything I might need for the next month, and I'll be moving out. Yes, for the next month. I won't be living here. We'll still be legally married. But I won't be residing here. When I mentioned this, she gasped and started to whimper, but she didn't openly cry or attempt to speak. I continued, during that month, you have two important things to do. First, you must decide if you love me and if you want to continue being my wife. Regardless of my decision, you need to make this choice. If you don't love me or don't want to be my wife, nothing else matters. So you must make this decision. But I don't want to hear it today. Take the time to think about it, and after 1 month, you can let me know. Not before. Secondly, you need to put in writing all the details of your betrayal of our marriage. I loved the Carla I knew, the one I married. I have to tell you that I don't love the Carla I now discover because I don't even recognize who you've become. So every single aspect of your affair or affairs needs to be disclosed to me. I want to know who you had this affair or these affairs with. If it was just one person, I want their name. If there were multiple people, I want all of their names. I want to know why you had this affair or affairs. What did they offer you that I couldn't? I want to know when they started, how often they occurred, where they happened, what you did, and what you said. I want to know what you gained from these affairs. I want every detail, Carla. Don't leave anything out. I want to get to know the real you, the woman you truly are. I've lost the image I had of you, but if I'm going to have any shot at saving our marriage, I need to understand who you've become. Remember this, Carla. I have concrete evidence. That said, do not omit any details, and don't even think about trying to deceive your way through this. If you lie to me, I can guarantee it's over. If you tell me every truthful detail, there's a chance we could salvage our relationship. I said a chance, no promises. Don't read more into it than that. I could see the panic intensifying in her eyes, and I was fairly certain she grasped the seriousness of the situation. If you find you can't or don't want to tell me the truth, just let me know by the end of the month, and we'll end our marriage as swiftly and painlessly as possible. Right now, the ball is in your court. You have all the decisions to make over the next month. When you've decided on your feelings toward me and whether you want to remain married to me, you can email a message to me at my work email and attach your written account of your betrayal. I expect both of those exactly 4 weeks from today, no sooner and no later. Also, if I ever discover that you resume your affair at any point in the future, our marriage will be immediately terminated. Ensure you understand that. Now, concerning the kids, do you want them with you for the next month? Or would you prefer I take them? Either way is fine with me. If you want them, I'll visit them every Wednesday night. I'll pick them up from the babysitter and have them until 8:30 p.m., then bring them home. I'll call you upon arrival so you can come get them, and I know you're here. On weekends, I'll have them on one of the 2 days. You work out the schedule that suits you best, and I'll adhere to it. If you don't want the kids, I offer the same schedule to you as I've proposed. You can collect the kids from the babysitter on Wednesdays, and I'll pick them up here at 8:30 p.m. You can have them on one of the 2 weekend days each week, and I'll bring them to you on the chosen day. I'm going to start packing my things now, and once I'm finished, I'm leaving. Please decide about the kids before I go. With that, I exited the room and went upstairs to pack a few bags. While I was packing, I could hear her sobbing downstairs. But by the time I returned, she had regained some composure. Her eyes were red, and her makeup was smeared, but she seemed more in control. Dawn, I know you don't want to hear this. You're right, I don't want to hear it. Follow my instructions or we can end this fraudulent marriage right now. Do you want to keep the kids with you, or should I take them? I want them with me, she cried. Okay, then I'm leaving. I'll call you tomorrow to discuss the schedule for picking up the kids on Wednesdays and 1 day each weekend. Goodbye, Carla. And I left. The month passed relatively quickly. I took Steve and Lori out to dinner every Wednesday night and then back to my hotel suite. Lori, being so young, didn't know much about what was going on, but Steve had some inkling that something was amiss. He asked me why I wasn't at home, and I explained that his mother and I were dealing with some marital issues and trying to work them out, so it was best if I stayed away for a little while. I reassured him to be patient and not worry about us, emphasizing that both his mother and I loved him and Lori very much. Steve seemed satisfied with my answers, and I left it at that for the time being. I saw Carla each time I dropped off the kids at the house. She'd come to the front door to greet them, and ensure they entered the house safely. Once she started walking toward the car to talk to me, but I simply held up my hand to stop her and drove away. I could see her face in tears as I drove away, and she remained in the doorway. Exactly 1 month to the day after our confrontation, I received an email from Carla. Her message read as follows. Dear Don, I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for the pain you've endured. I love you, and I want to be your wife. Please call me after reading my letter and decide to come back to me. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I need you and your children need you. Love, Carla. Upon reading that, I already suspected that Carla wouldn't be completely honest in her letter. I knew she wouldn't admit that Steve and Lori weren't my children. However, I had to read the letter to be certain. Attached to the email was a lengthy letter with the following content. Dear Don, I'm writing this letter to persuade you to return to me. I love you deeply, and I want to continue being your wife and grow old with you. It's a simple thing to say, but what I have to tell you is extremely complicated. I know it will hurt you, and I never wanted that to happen, but I'm committed to being completely honest with you. I love 2 men, you and Steve Wilson. You mentioned I was having an affair, and by most people's definition, I suppose I was. However, I didn't see it as an affair. An affair typically involves a brief infatuation leading to a short-lived, illicit romantic relationship. I understand this is going to be painful, but my relationship with Steve dates back to before my relationship with you. You know I was involved with someone else when I met you. That someone else was Steve Wilson. We had been dating since my sophomore year. Steve is a handsome, charming, witty, intelligent, and caring man. He still possesses all those qualities. Shortly after I started dating him, I realized I was in love with him. He embodied most of what a girl could hope for in a boyfriend or husband. I loved him, Dawn, but he had one significant flaw that made marriage impossible with him. He was incredibly attractive and overly confident, making it clear he wouldn't stay faithful to me as a husband. Despite my love for him, I knew I could never marry him, and I was determined to preserve my virginity for my future husband. He persistently tried to persuade me otherwise, and although part of me was tempted, I held my ground. Then I met you. In a short time, I realized I loved you and wanted to marry you. The issue was that I didn't stop loving Steve. I loved you both differently yet similarly. It's hard to explain, but that's the closest I can get to describing my feelings. Steve continued to pursue me despite knowing about you and my love for you. I once told him that maybe, after I gave my virginity to my future husband, I might consider having closeness with him before marriage. He found it odd, but didn't press the matter. After we made love, he could tell that something had changed. He kept asking for the opportunity I had offered, and we weren't married or even engaged. Even though I knew you were the man I wanted to marry, Don, I gave in. I allowed Steve, and in truth, I wanted him to be intimate with me. I loved him alongside my love for you. I became pregnant, and I was certain it was Steve's child, not yours. But I wanted you to be my husband, not him. I can't believe I did all of this to you, but I did. From that moment forward, I know I betrayed your trust. I informed you about our impending baby, and you married me. You never questioned the child's paternity since you were the one who took my virginity. Little Steve looked like me, so there was no doubt about that. I didn't stop seeing Steve when you were away. We continued to meet every month or so. I remained involved with him even after our marriage. Loved you both. You were a fantastic father to Steve and continue to be for Lori. A woman couldn't wish for a better husband. My love for you kept growing each day, although I understand this won't make you feel any better. My love for Steve remains unchanged from what it was back then. I scrutinized you closely for a couple of years, almost hoping you would be unfaithful so I could somehow justify my actions. But you never seemed to cheat on me as far as I could tell. You embodied everything a woman desires in a husband, and I was glad to have you even if I didn't deserve you. I'm aware I'm dragging this out, but I'll continue and tell you the rest. You wanted me to explain many things, so I indeed provide all the details I can. Who is Steve Wilson? The answer is Steve Wilson. Why? Because I love him. Where? We met in various places, his home, here, hotels and motels. We would meet at restaurants, parks, and in our cars. When? I don't remember all the dates and times, but it was once a month or every other month from then until now. We just made it happen when we could. We made love. We played and we played. We talked, We kissed and we hugged. He did things with me that you and I had not done. I didn't really want to engage in those activities, but I permitted them with him because I had such limited time together. Don, he loves me as well. I saw it as a small consolation because I was your wife living with you, while he only had me for brief periods. Steve eventually got married. It didn't last because, just as I expected, he cheated on his wife. He was involved with me and other women too, which his wife discovered, leading to their divorce. He urged me to divorce you and marry him, but I made it clear that I would never divorce you. I knew he would cheat on me, and it's amusing how the standard I demanded in a husband's character was much higher than the one I exhibited as a wife. I deeply regret that. Don, I know this is already too much, but there are 2 more things you need to know. Steve is also Lori's father. I'm pregnant, and I'm fairly certain it happened the last time Steve and I were together. This means that all 3 of our children have Steve as their biological parent. I thought it would be best if they were all true biological siblings, leaving no doubt. However, you are, and always will be, their father. You've loved and cared for them, while Steve hasn't even met them all these years. He doesn't want to be their father, and I don't want him to be either because I want you to be their father. I'm deeply sorry that all of this occurred and that you've been so terribly hurt. If I could undo it all, I would. I'm praying that you'll come home to me, that you'll give me a chance to work this out and save our marriage. I'm praying that your love for me is strong enough to desire that. Please come back to me. I realize I haven't answered every question you must have, but I promise to address any inquiries you have. I'm begging you to give me a chance. I'll be waiting for your call. Love, Carla. The next day, which was Friday, I called Carla and informed her that I would be returning home early in the morning. I asked her to take the day off and drop the kids off at the babysitter's because we had a lot of talking to do. She agreed to my request and inquired about what was on my mind. I responded, "You'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out," and ended the call. The following day, I entered the house. Carla was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, which I gratefully accepted. I suggested we sit at the table so I could discuss some matters with her. After we got settled, I opened my briefcase and placed a substantial stack of paperwork and files on the table. Carla, this is my evidence. It begins with this audio tape. From it, I discovered several things. You were having an affair with a man named Steve. This affair had been ongoing since before we got married. Neither of my 2 children are biologically mine. You had planned on becoming pregnant again by him, so I'd be raising a 3rd child for both of you. You said you loved me and didn't want to leave me for him. The expression on her face was one of disbelief. If you're wondering where the tape came from, it's the audio recorder we used to record snoring. I erased everything except the snoring to keep you from realizing that you had been exposed. I didn't actually go to New York. I went to Chicago Heights to investigate your past, find out who Steve was, and learn about my children. That's why you couldn't locate me in New York. When I discovered the truth about you, I didn't want to see or talk to you again. I laid out the high school yearbooks on the table. I thought the best place to start would be your yearbooks. I compiled a list of everyone who had written comments in your yearbook and categorized them based on their apparent connection to you. Here are the details of what I found in your yearbook. I placed my cross-reference list on top of the yearbooks and also pulled out the reunion booklet. The school administration sent me this booklet for your upcoming class reunion. I used it to gather current names, addresses, and phone numbers for all the individuals on my contact list. I obtained valuable information from Jill Johnson Marker and Steve's wife's sister who was in your class. There was a guy from high school who had a crush on you for a long time, and he was quite helpful too. He told me he stopped loving you when he found out you intended to have a relationship with Steve behind my back after we got married. Many of your friends and acquaintances from our hometown know about your actions and what kind of person you are, Carla. I don't understand how you could have believed that Steve would keep quiet. After all, he was also involved in this. The next piece of evidence was a folder containing the letter from the DNA lab. This letter confirms that I am not the father of our 2 children. I got in touch with Steve's ex-wife, and she agreed to meet with me. She allowed me to obtain DNA samples from her 2 kids, hers and Steve's, and this letter certifies that Steve and Lori are half-siblings to Steve Wilson's 2 children. The letter from Mrs. Wilson affirms that these samples were collected with her consent and that 2 of them are from her and Steve's 2 sons. I removed one last folder from my briefcase. Carla, this is all the evidence I have right now. I'm pretty sure I could find more if I tried, like hotel receipts, traces of bodily fluids on clothes, articles of clothing, or possessions I'm not aware of. I suspect there's a lot of evidence, maybe even eyewitnesses, that I could uncover if I made the effort. I don't think I need to do any of that to prove the extent of your affair, do I? She shook her head no. I'm not someone who finds pleasure in listening to my wife being involved with another man, and I certainly don't need to hear the details from you. So I won't ask any more about that. Your letter confirms all the facts I've gathered, and I appreciate your honesty for once in your life. I thank you for having the courage to stop lying to me. Carla, I loved you with all my heart and gave everything I had to this marriage. I believed you did the same, and I was incredibly happy with you. But when I found out this foundation was built on deception, the only conclusion I could reach is that our marriage was based on lies, making our marriage itself a lie. When I first discovered all of this, I genuinely wanted to kick you, maybe even Steve. I don't have that desire anymore, but I will if it's absolutely necessary. All this while, I've been watching Carla's expressions change. She went from being amazed at how I uncovered these truths to being terrified of what lay ahead for our marriage. Her reaction was even stronger when I confessed that I once felt like kicking her. I opened the last file on the table. Carla, these are divorce papers. I've already signed them, and all that's left is for you to sign them too. There are also documents granting me full custody of all the children, including your unborn baby. Her expression shifted from fear to sheer panic. At that moment, I thought I saw desperation in her eyes. Despite everything she'd done to our marriage, that look made me incredibly sad. It wasn't what I wanted, but I felt I had no other option. I couldn't continue living in the situation she had created. Once you've signed these papers, I'll keep them in my safe deposit box. Whether I actually file them with the courts in the future will depend on your actions. If you agree to all my terms, I won't leave you or force you out, but we won't be living as husband and wife anytime soon. I expect you to move your things into the spare bedroom right away, as I'll be using the master bedroom. I anticipate Steve to pay $2,000 per year for each child in child support. This money will be deposited into a trust account for each child until they turn 18, which includes the new baby. Steve's words made it clear he was involved. The total due now is $30,000, $16,000 for Steven, $8,000 for Lori as back payments, and $2,000 each for the upcoming year. Furthermore, he must acquire a fully paid life insurance policy worth $108,000, with the children as beneficiaries and you as the policy owner, allowing you to make any necessary changes. He will receive a letter stating that once he fulfills his commitment for voluntary child support, the policy ownership will be transferred back to him. Should he fail to meet either of these requirements, I will make this situation public and take legal action against him to recover both past and future child support. These court-ordered payments will be deducted from his wages by his current and future employers, potentially affecting his career advancement, which I'm not concerned about. If he accepts my terms but doesn't fulfill his future obligations, his life insurance benefits will provide for his children. Interpret that as you wish. All of this will be conveyed to him in a formal letter from my attorney, along with copies of all the evidence I've gathered so far. Update. You have two choices. You're free to leave any time without the children. Just pack your bags and go. Alternatively, you can sign these papers and stay here with your children, even though we won't be living as a married couple. I don't see why you'd need an attorney since your options are quite limited. However, if you still want an attorney to look at these papers, you have until next Tuesday morning to get that done. But let me be clear. If you refuse to sign the divorce and custody papers and attempt to leave with the children, I will track you down and take legal action. Regardless of what happened to our marriage, I won't lose my children, and neither they nor I deserve that. I won't tolerate it, period. There's one more condition. You must never see or communicate with Steve again. If you do, and I find out, both of you will face severe consequences. You've already lost me, and you'll lose Steve too, as I insist on this. You won't be allowed to love either of us. Don't make a foolish move and lose your children as well. That's everything. So, do you want to sign these papers right now, or would you rather consult an attorney? Yes, I will sign them now, she said. With that, she signed both the divorce papers and the custody papers. I placed them in my briefcase and informed her that I was going to the bank to secure them in my safe deposit box. I also told her to move into the spare bedroom as we had discussed. I said, "Goodbye, Carla, I'll see you tomorrow," and then I left. I moved back in the next day and got settled. Carla had relocated her belongings to the spare room as instructed. Life moved forward. Our household seemed normal to an outsider. We maintained civility, engaged in conversations, shared meals, played with the children, and laughed at their antics. On the surface, we looked like an ordinary family. What was missing, though, was any trace of marital bed life. There were no secret glances between husband and wife like we used to share. The intimate exchanges between us were gone, and our warmth had vanished. I avoided touching her, and I didn't allow her to touch me. Time moved forward like a relentless force, occasionally flattening us as it passed. Many nights, I lay awake contemplating what we had lost, desperately wishing it would all fade away. I wished it was just a bad dream that would dissolve upon waking. Unfortunately, it lingered with us every single day. I'm aware that Carla endured countless tormented nights too. Every so often her sobs would reach my ears. In the past, her tears would have torn me apart. There was a time when I would have done anything to restore her happiness. After hearing her cry, I would return to my bed and ponder how I had become cold and emotionally detached. I knew I had changed, turned into someone I was far from proud of, but I no longer cared. I had stopped feeling her pain and, frankly, had trouble even recognizing my own. Over the next few months, Carla made repeated attempts to engage me in conversations about her actions. She hoped we could talk it out and find a way to happiness once more. I responded bluntly, making it clear I wasn't interested in hearing more about her betrayal and that there was nothing she could say to make it right. Every time I rejected her, she retreated into herself, and her room would be filled with her cries. During this time, Carla's body was undergoing changes as her pregnancy advanced. One Friday morning, she called to inform me that she was in labor. I rushed home to take her to the hospital, and 3 hours later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I stayed with her in the labor room and accompanied her to the delivery room. I even held her hand while she endured the labor pains and the process of childbirth. When Carla asked me what name I wanted for the baby, I suggested Grace, so we could call her Gracie. This choice surprised her because Grace was her mother's name, and she knew I had reservations about her mother due to her family's past treatment of me. I told her that she could select any name she liked as long as it had no connection to me or my family. She looked shocked and hurt by this response. The new me didn't care. I just walked away. On Saturday, I visited Gracie and was charmed by her. She was absolutely precious, and it only took a few moments for her to win my heart. I fell in love with her, and it left me questioning how this could happen. How could I fall in love with another man's child? It had happened twice before with Stephen and Lori, although I didn't know they weren't my biological children. How could it occur again? I couldn't explain it, but it did. On Sunday, I went to the hospital to pick up Carla and Gracie to take them home. Carla's mother and father were in her hospital room when I arrived. Grace confronted me, asking why I hadn't visited Carla on Saturday when I came to see Gracie. I expected Carla to say something in my defense, but she remained silent. Carla had a tear in her eye and turned away from me when I held her gaze. I couldn't believe she allowed her mother to attack me once again. I felt deeply disgusted and furious. I told Grace that what I did or didn't do was none of her business, and if she wanted more information, she should ask her daughter. She pushed back, claiming that I had no right to speak to her that way because she was my wife's mother, and it was her concern. I turned to look at Carla again and she raised her head, eventually saying, "Mom and Dad, just leave it alone. I think it's time for you to go, so Don can take Gracie and me home." Her father couldn't resist sharing his opinion before he left. He said, "Listen, son, that's not the way to treat your wife's parents, but I should have expected it from someone like you." I retorted, "Don't you ever call me son again. I've never been your son, and I never will be. Now please leave." As we were in the car heading home, Carla expressed her apologies, saying, "Don, I'm so sorry about that." I replied, "Why, Carla? They've never liked me. They've never shown me an ounce of respect as their son-in-law. They've always thought their wonderful daughter married beneath her. Why should I be sorry? You've always allowed them to think that way about me. You've never defended me when they insulted me. Well, Now I understand why. It's because you've never shown me any respect either. You started disrespecting me even before we were married, and it's continued every day since. No wonder they don't respect me. Time passed, and over the next couple of months, I kept myself quite occupied. I had a DNA test performed on Gracie, and the results confirmed that she was also Steve's child. I didn't really care about the test's outcome. I knew she would be. I only wanted the results for documentation. I loved that little darling as if she were my own. No father could love a child more than I loved her. When she looked up at me and smiled, it warmed my heart every time. That love had been firmly established within the first few minutes of my Saturday hospital visit, and it would never fade. I also spent more time with Stephen and Lori. I was the best father any child could wish for. I loved them more with each passing day and never once regretted that they were my children. Steve Wilson might have contributed half of their DNA, but I was their father in every other sense of the word. Life with my children couldn't have been any better. I loved and cherished them, and they loved and cherished me. The only thing missing was the love of my life, Carla. I often ruminated on that love and how much she had meant to me over the years. God, I missed my wife. I missed the woman who loved me. I cried often. Another action I took was using my connections to tap Steve Wilson's office and home phones. I'm aware it was illegal, but I didn't care. As expected, I discovered what I was looking for. Carla couldn't resist the urge to call Steve and inform him that he was a father again. Hi, Steve, it's Carla. What are you doing, Carla? You know you're not supposed to contact me. What if Don finds out? Oh, he won't find out, Steve. I'm using a payphone in the mall. There's no way he can discover that I called you. Sweetheart, I just wanted to tell you that you're a father again and she's adorable. Her name is Gracie. You make the most precious babies. I'm happy that she's adorable, Carla. When do you want to start working on the next one? He chuckled. You know I can't do that right now, Steve. Don and I haven't had closeness since he found out, so there's no way I could get pregnant now. Wow, you must really need it badly then, huh? When do you want to get together? I do need it badly, Steve, and I'd love to meet with you, but I can't take the chance right now. I'm still hoping that one day Don will forgive me, and I can have my marriage back. After that, we'll have to see if we can find a way to be together occasionally. I doubt it will ever be like it was before, though. Don is a lot more suspicious now than he was back then. Okay, Carla, just know that I'll try to meet you wherever and whenever you can make it. Please stay in touch. I will, Steve. Goodbye, sweetie, I love you. If you believe that phone conversation hurt me or made me furious, you're mistaken. After what she had done to me, there was nothing left of my heart that she could destroy. I was completely cold towards Carla. In my eyes, she was irrelevant. All the love I once had for her was now directed towards Stephen, Lori, and Gracie. They received all my love, and there was nothing left for Carla. Nothing she did or could ever do would change that. If I hadn't had my children to love, things might have been entirely different. I might have wasted away or turned to alcohol or work. I might have forgiven her and tried to rebuild our marriage. None of that happened because I had my children to love and they loved me. I didn't need anything or anyone else. Update. A few months later, Steve Wilson tragically left this world in a car accident. The accident occurred when his car veered off the road and collided with a tree. Carla learned of his death when she dialed his office number and a stranger answered. I had kept the phone tap active for this very reason. Hello, this is Jonathan Davis. Oh, I was trying to reach Steve Wilson. I'm sorry. Steve Wilson doesn't work here anymore. May I ask who is calling? I'm just an old friend. I'll try to call him at home. Miss, I know this might be a shock for you, but Steve was in a car accident about 3 weeks ago. You should probably contact his family for more details. I'm so sorry to have to tell you that. I heard her gasp as the shock took her breath away, and then the line went dead. That night when I came home from work, Carla gave me a strange look. I didn't act any differently than usual and she didn't say a word. That night I heard her sobbing again in her bedroom, and it continued for several nights. Shortly after, she received a letter from the insurance company with a claim form for Steve's insurance, naming the children as his beneficiaries. She showed it to me and asked how to fill it out. When it was mailed, she gave me another strange look. You didn't seem shocked when you found out Steve had died, she said. I replied, Carla, I have no feelings for Steve one way or another now. I'm not shocked and I don't care. All I'm concerned about is ensuring his children have the money for their college funds. My reaction clearly unsettled her, and she continued to look at me strangely. A week later, a check arrived for $108,000, the payout from Steve's insurance policy. Carla and I deposited the funds into each of the children's college fund accounts. Each account had $46,000, plus some earned interest from Steve's initial deposit. When Steven was ready for college, he'd have about $80,000 available. Lori would have around $100,000, and Gracie would have roughly $130,000. This would be a significant help in covering any education costs they might have. On the way back home, I mentioned that, at the very least, the kids' college expenses were secured, and we wouldn't need to worry about funding each year. Upon arriving home, Carla requested to have a conversation. I agreed, and she inquired whether I would ever forgive her and love her again. I shook my head, signaling a no. She called me a cold-hearted person. I admitted she was entirely correct about that. She asked how I could become so emotionally distant. I explained that I had never been that way in the past, and was confident that her actions towards me had caused me to become this way. I assured her that I didn't feel the same emotional distance with my children, and she recognized that she didn't see this side of me when I was with them either. I stated that it was evident that genuine love or respect for me had never existed, and she had only been utilizing me all these years and would continue if given the chance. Then she surprised me by asking if I had played a role in Steve's death. I was certain she suspected it from the moment she learned. I nodded in agreement. She inquired why, and I explained that I had tapped into his work and home phones, eavesdropping on her conversations with him. I told her that I had overheard everything, including her discussions about him becoming a father again, and even her considerations of a potential reunion, albeit not immediately but perhaps later after things had settled down. I stated that it was evident that genuine love or respect for me had never existed, and she had only been utilizing me all these years and would continue if given the chance. She wondered if her end was near. I nodded in agreement, affirming that it was only a matter of time. 2 months later, she grew weary of waiting and took her own life. Tears welled in my eyes, not for Carla. She had become a stranger to me over a year ago when I first heard the recording, exposing the falsehood of our marriage. However, my tears flowed because my children were in pain. Their innocent hearts, shattered by this tragedy, broke my own. Carla left me a letter, strategically placed for only me to discover. The letter began, "Dear Don, I am deeply apologetic. I cared for Steve, but not in the way I cherished you. My love for you surpassed anything else. I am aware that my actions obliterated your love for me, and I cannot endure a life without it. I understand the immense pain I caused you, and I had hoped that, with time, you might find it within yourself to forgive me and love me once more. I realize that my choices transformed you into a person you were never before. When I saw you confront Steve, I understood that your love for me had vanished, and I couldn't bear to accept that truth. I will carry the knowledge of having ruined a good man to my grave. I suppose you weren't the ideal husband for me after all. What I really wanted was a man who could accept my selfishness, my desire to love and be loved by 2 men. I don't blame you because it's an unreasonable thing to ask of anyone, but that's what I longed for. I lacked the strength to release myself from Steve's love. I should have, but I couldn't. I hope that my passing will free you from the inner turmoil you're experiencing. I hope that someday you'll find it in your heart to let go of the anger you carry towards me and Steve. I pray that you'll eventually forgive yourself for the person you became and for your actions towards Steve. I also know that the bad feeling is never around when you're with your kids. I can see the love and admiration in your eyes, and it makes me happy to see them loving you back. When you look at the kids, I hope you can see a part of me in them and love them a little more for it. I hope that one day you'll love me again through your love for them. I'm really sorry, Don. Please forgive me for this last action. I just can't handle it anymore. I love you, Carla." This time I cried genuinely. The bad feeling went away as she had hoped for. I cried for the friend I lost, who would never share laughter or tears with me again. I cried for the lover who would never embrace me or love me again. I cried for the mother of my children, who wouldn't be a part of their lives, their joys, their weddings, their grandchildren, their achievements, or their setbacks ever again. I cried for the emptiness in my heart that was left when the hatred disappeared. I had filled that space with hatred to erase the love I felt for her, and now it was vacant. I cried for the life I had imagined with Carla, knowing it could never be replaced. And then I cried for my soul, realizing I had allowed myself to become less than human because of my hatred. I got rid of the letter. I went to the bank and got rid of all the proof that she cheated, except the DNA evidence that was kept in the safe deposit box. No one would ever find out about it unless there was a future health reason for my kids to know I'm not their biological father. In my will, I arranged for money to be put into a medical trust and appointed a medical trustee to manage it. The DNA results would be given to the trustee in a sealed envelope, only to be opened if there were any hereditary health issues. I'd do whatever it takes to keep Carla's memory positive and healthy for her kids and her family. No one else needed to know what she did. I never stopped Carla's parents from seeing their grandkids. They loved them and treated them well. I knew they held me responsible for their daughter's death. I could see it in their eyes, but they were smart enough not to bring it up. I guess they thought it was best to treat me well, or I might not let them see their grandkids. I wouldn't have done that, but I was grateful they didn't bother me. Over time, the emptiness in my heart began to fill with love for the kids and fond memories of Carla. Despite everything that happened, she had made me happy for 8 years, and I didn't want to erase that anymore. Eventually, I even forgave myself. It took a while, but it happened. I had 3 amazing kids, and they needed their father. I sat in the front row and watched Steven graduate from high school. He got his diploma from the school board president, who gave him a warm hug. Next up was her daughter, Jennifer. She got her diploma and a hug, too. Jennifer was Steven's girlfriend, and they'd been together since his first day of high school 4 years ago. I couldn't be prouder of him, and I couldn't help but think that Carla would be proud, too. I know I had tears in my eyes as they walked off the stage together, looking so grown up. Steven and Jennifer were both heading to the University of Illinois in the fall, and they were deeply in love. It was clear to everyone that they'd eventually get married. I was sure Carla would have liked Jennifer too. After the ceremony ended, they came down to the audience and gave me a big hug. I couldn't have been prouder of them. They both did really well in school and were great at sports. Their future looked really bright. Steven asked if it was okay for him and Jennifer to go to a few graduation parties before coming home, and I said yes. Jennifer gave me another hug and said, "Thanks, Daddy. We'll see you and Mom later." As they walked away, I thought about what she called me. Daddy. I had become her father, too. I met Leslie, her mother, a few weeks after Steven started high school. She was the school board president and involved in school activities. Steven kept talking about Jennifer and how great her mom was, and we eventually met at a football game. I felt like a teenager again because I was immediately smitten with Leslie. I probably acted like a fool. I learned that she was a single mom. She had divorced when Jennifer was 9, and her ex-husband wanted nothing to do with their family. After chatting for a while, I asked if she wanted to get coffee after the game, and she said yes. We spent a lot of time together, and a year later, we got married. I love her deeply, and she loves me back. For a long time, I didn't think I could ever be happily married again. But I am. For the past 3 years, we've been a complete family. She loves Steven, Lori, and Gracie as if they were her own, and I love Jennifer like she's my own daughter. I've learned that you don't need to be a biological parent to love a child. Leslie is aware of everything that happened with Steve and Carla. She knows all the actions I took during that time. I didn't want to keep any secrets from her if I was going to love her and spend my life with her. When I explained everything to her, I saw her expression change briefly. She mentioned that my revelation surprised her, but she believed I was telling the truth about the bad times being over, so she wasn't worried about our future. Our life together is amazing. I have a new friend, a new romantic partner, and a lifelong companion for all my dreams. My heart is filled with love for my new wife and our children. And yes, there's a small space in there for the good memories I shared with Carla. Steven has grown into a handsome young man, and while he resembles Carla somewhat as he ages, he starts to resemble his father more. On the other hand, Lori and Gracie are like mini versions of their mother. They are beautiful and charming, and I see so much of Carla in them that I can't help but love her for giving me these wonderful children. As they grew older, I shared with them as much as I could about their mother. I want them to know her as I once did, love her as I did back then, and understand that she loved them deeply. Just then, Leslie approached me, and my thoughts about the past were interrupted. She asked where Stephen and Jennifer were going. I told her they wanted to attend a couple of graduation parties before returning home. She smiled at me and suggested that if I hurried, we could head home and start working on the baby we had talked about. We quickly got to the car and headed home. Life is good and getting better all the time.